The fork was already halfway to my mouth when my son looked across the candle-lit table, smiled the way a man smiles when he has rehearsed what he is about to say, and destroyed 27 years of dinner conversation in one breath. His name is Daniel, my Daniel, the boy I rocked at 3 in the morning when the whole world was dark and quiet, and it was just the two of us and a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. The boy I drove to soccer practice, to piano recitals, to the emergency room when he broke his collarbone falling off a bicycle I had warned him 3 times was too big for his age. My Daniel, now 31 years old, sitting at the head of the table at his own dinner party, in his own house, with his wife and 2 of their friends watching, cleared his throat and said, "Mom, don't take this the wrong way, but you've always been a little behind the times. I just want you to know it's okay. Not everyone can keep up." The table went still. His wife Priya blinked once and looked down at her plate as though something absolutely fascinating had just appeared in her risotto. Their friend Marcus, a tall man who works in finance, and had been laughing loudly about something involving a golf course 10 seconds before, suddenly found the label on his wine bottle very interesting. The other friend, a woman named Sasha, just stared straight ahead like she was watching a building catch fire and wasn't sure whether to call someone. And I just sat there, with my fork still in the air. There is a particular kind of pain that does not announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, the way cold does, not all at once, but seeping in through every gap until you realize you are frozen. That was what I felt in those first 3 seconds. Not rage, not tears, something colder and calmer and honestly more dangerous than either of those things. Because in those 3 seconds, I did not see the 31-year-old man in the expensive blazer sitting across from me. I saw every version of Daniel I had ever known stacked on top of each other like transparencies on an overhead projector. The infant, the toddler, the sulking teenager, the young man who called me crying from his college dorm at midnight because he had failed his first exam and thought the world was ending, the groom who had squeezed my hand so hard at his wedding that I had a small bruise on my knuckles the next day. I saw all of them. And then I set my fork down. I should give you context, because context is everything, and my Daniel has always been very good at removing it. I am 63 years old. I spent 22 years as a high school English teacher, then another 11 consulting for a literacy nonprofit that worked in under-resourced communities across 4 states. I have read more books than most people know exist. I have sat across tables from school board members, city council representatives, foundation executives, and United States senators, and held my ground with every single one of them. I am not, by any reasonable measure, a woman who lacks confidence or competence. But I do not own a smartphone of the latest generation. I still write letters, real letters, on paper with a pen. I do not understand why anyone needs 17 different apps to accomplish what a telephone call and a calendar used to handle without incident. I said as much at Thanksgiving, and Daniel, who works in technology and considers himself something of an evangelist for the digital age, had been quietly needling me about it ever since. Tonight, apparently, the needling had graduated to performance. He had waited until he had an audience. That part did not escape me. He had not said this at Thanksgiving when it was just family. He had not texted it to me privately, which would have been a kindness. He had saved it, polished it, probably for a moment when there were witnesses, when there was a table, when there was a social cost to pushing back. That calculation told me everything I needed to know about what was actually happening here. This was not a son gently teasing his mother. This was a man using his mother as a prop to look sophisticated in front of people he wanted to impress. So I set my fork down. Here is what nobody tells you about silence. It has weight, real, physical, measurable weight, and the person who breaks it first almost always loses. I have known this since I was 24 years old, sitting in my very first parent-teacher conference with a father who came in angry and loud, and certain that I had graded his daughter unfairly. I said nothing for 6 full seconds after he finished his speech. 6 seconds is a very long time when you are sitting 2 feet from someone. His bluster had nowhere to go. By second 4, he had started to fidget. By second 6, he had walked back half of what he'd said of his own accord, without me uttering a single syllable. I gave Daniel 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Marcus took a sip of wine. Sasha smoothed the napkin in her lap. Priya, bless her, glanced up at me with an expression that I can only describe as apologetic dread. The face of a woman who loves her husband and also knew in this moment that he had made a significant miscalculation. On the 4th second, I smiled. Not a sharp smile, not a wounded smile. The calm, unhurried smile of someone who has absolutely nowhere to be and nothing to prove. "Daniel," I said, "do you remember who taught you to read?" He blinked. "What?" "Do you remember who taught you to read? Phonics, vowel sounds, the first time you sounded out a whole sentence by yourself. Who was sitting next to you?" A pause. "You were." "And do you remember who helped you write your college application essay? The one that got you into the program you wanted?" His jaw shifted. "Mom, I'm asking a simple question. Who sat with you for 3 weeks, 3 drafts, helping you find the argument that was already in you, just needed pulling out?" "You did," he said quietly now. I picked up my fork again. I took a bite of the risotto, which, I should say, was genuinely excellent. Priya is a wonderful cook. I told her so right then, right in the middle of everything, because it was true and because it recentered the table for one brief, merciful moment. Then I looked back at Daniel. "I'm not behind the times," I said. "I'm from the times. There's a difference. The times you think are so advanced right now, the apps, the platforms, the algorithms, they were built on a foundation of things that existed before you were born. Critical thinking, long-form communication, the ability to sit with an idea long enough to actually understand it instead of scrolling past it." I kept my voice completely even, conversational, like we were discussing the weather. "I taught those things professionally for over 2 decades. I'd argue I was ahead, not behind." Marcus set his wine glass down with a small, careful click. "The technology will keep changing," I continued. "It will be unrecognizable in another 20 years and Daniel, sweetheart, some bright-eyed 25-year-old is going to sit across from you at a dinner party and make you feel exactly the way you just tried to make me feel. And on that day, I hope you remember this one." The room was so quiet I could hear the candle flames. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. He looked, suddenly and startlingly, like the 7-year-old who had accidentally broken my favorite lamp playing indoor basketball and stood in the wreckage trying to figure out if there was any version of this where he did not have to take responsibility. There wasn't then either. Priya refilled my glass without being asked. Marcus asked me what the literacy nonprofit had worked on, and we ended up talking for 40 minutes about reading intervention programs and why they fail and what actually works, and it was a genuinely wonderful conversation. The kind you don't have often with someone who's asking because they want to know, not because they're being polite. Sasha turned out to have grown up with a mother who was also a teacher, and we discovered, laughing, that our childhoods had more in common than either of us would have expected. Daniel was quiet through much of this. Not sulking, to his credit, he was not sulking. He was listening. I watched him do it. There were 2 or 3 moments where I saw something move across his face that I recognized from a long time ago, from all those late-night homework sessions and difficult conversations about choices and consequences and what kind of man he wanted to be. It was the expression he gets when something is actually landing. "Good." On the way out at the door, he hugged me. A real hug, not the half-hug of obligation. He held on for a second longer than he needed to, and I felt the full weight of him, this tall, complicated, capable, occasionally infuriating person I had the privilege of raising. "I'm sorry," he said into my shoulder. "That was a stupid thing to say." "It was," I agreed. "But you knew that before you said it, and you said it anyway. That's the part worth thinking about." He pulled back and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts embarrassed and something warmer. "You're terrifying, you know that." "You're only figuring that out now." I kissed his cheek. "Tell Priya the risotto was perfect. I'll call you Thursday." "What I want you to know. I'm not telling this story to make Daniel look bad. He is a good man who made a bad choice in a particular moment, and that is a very human thing to be. I am not angry. I was not angry that night, not really. What I felt was something more like grief, the quick, sharp grief of seeing your child reach for something unworthy of them, the way you feel when you watch them lie about something small or take credit for someone else's work. A wince on their behalf. I am telling this story because I know I am not the only one who has sat at a table and felt someone use them as scenery in a performance. I know I am not the only parent who has felt the particular sting of being diminished by the person they gave everything to build up. I know that feeling, that cold, creeping, should I just let this go? Feeling. And I want you to know what I have learned from 63 years of navigating tables and rooms and relationships of every kind. You do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to match someone's energy to hold your ground. The most devastating response to someone who expects to shake you is stillness. The most unsettling thing you can do to a person who has prepared a speech designed to knock you off balance is simply to not fall. Set your fork down, take your 4 seconds, and then remind them quietly and without malice exactly who they are talking to. Not because you need to win, because they need to remember. Daniel called on Thursday as promised. We talked for an hour. He asked me about a book I had mentioned at dinner, one I had used in my curriculum years ago, and said he had ordered a copy. I did not make a big deal of it. I just told him I thought he'd find it interesting and that we could talk about it when he finished. We will. That is the thing about the people we love. Even the difficult, humbling, table-going silent moments are just chapters. The story keeps going. The relationship keeps going. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, those are the chapters that matter most, the ones where someone sees themselves clearly, maybe for the first time in a while, reflected back in the calm eyes of someone who loves them enough to not look away. I drove home that night with the windows down, the late summer air moving through the car, the city sliding past in its blur of lights and motion. I was not triumphant. I was not wounded. I was something simpler and better than either. I was myself. Fully, quietly, unshakably myself. And no dinner table in the world can take that from you.